Hello everyone, welcome back to a new post today, and I hope you all are doing wonderfully well. So today let's have a brief discussion about disaster risk reduction in India, because recently the G20 Council's second disaster risk reduction working group meeting was concluded in Mumbai, and India has a vast disaster map. We are prone to various disasters, natural disasters, especially earthquakes, heat waves, cyclones, droughts, floods, etc. And it is in this line that the disaster reduction working group meeting also holds significance, because India seeks to learn from various other countries which have the same disaster prone areas, to learn from various technologies to reduce the risk of disasters in the country. But where does the term disaster come from? So the root of the word disaster comes from actually a natural hazard. A natural hazard is an extreme event that occurs naturally and causes harm to humans and environment. It is defined as an environmental phenomena that has the potential to impact societies and human environment. But a natural hazard is common and can occur at any time. We do not know when natural hazards actually happen, but they become disasters once they inflict human life and property. So when they take a toll on human beings and the property, it becomes a disaster. To reduce this risk or the loss because of disasters, there is something called as disaster risk reduction, which is very important part of disaster management. And we also have a particular framework for disaster management in the country with a particular legislation called as the National Disaster Management Act, and also we have a dedicated body for this called as the National Disaster Management Authority. So G20 Council, we are now holding the presidency of G20, and within this G20 we have various working groups having their meetings. So one working group is with regard to disaster risk reduction, which was concluded in Mumbai, and it had a technical and functional level officials coming to an understanding because of the importance of disaster resilient infrastructure. So infrastructure, countries, areas are prone to various disasters in the country, and therefore to withstand the disasters which we cannot control, but we can definitely reduce the impact of them on the humans and society, we need disaster planning, disaster management, disaster risk reduction, and also disaster resilient infrastructure and financing for disaster risk reduction for disaster risk reduction. Now this was also the central theme of this working group. Now the meeting concluded with a side event of eco-based approaches for disaster risk reduction. So not only focusing on technologies for disaster risk reduction, but also eco-based technologies for disaster risk reduction by the National Disaster Management Authority. And it was organized in collaboration with partners like the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is a dedicated body working in this area, and also the UN Major Group for Children and Young People and others. And the third and final meeting of the disaster risk reduction will be held in the coming days in Chennai in July 2023. So what exactly is disaster risk reduction? Now disaster risk reduction is also called as disaster risk management, and it is a systematic approach to identify the areas that are prone to disasters and also reduce the risk that are caused because of these disasters. It only aims to reduce the socio-economic vulnerabilities of people, societies, property to these disasters, and also dealing with the environmental and other hazards that trigger them. Disaster risk is an indicator of, if you have a larger disaster risk, it is an indicator of very poor development. So therefore, reducing the disaster risk requires integrating disaster risk reduction management practice into the planning system of the country, and also it is an important part of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which calls for resilient cities. So urban areas, the growing urbanization, have to be made resilient to withstand disasters which happen by nature and environment, etc. And climate change and global warming is only increasing the risk of these disasters. Therefore, decision makers have to now manage the risk because of these disasters, and disaster risk reduction planning is the most important component for disaster management. Now, India is one among the most disaster-prone countries in the world, and 27 out of 29 states and 7 union territories are exposed to recurrent natural disasters. So we have a large interlinkage of natural rivers. Apart from that, we are at the seismic zone of the Himalayas, which is pushing into the Asiatic plate, and we also have a vast coastline which we are vulnerable to cyclones. Global warming is only increasing the intensity of these and frequency of these cyclones. We are prone to earthquakes. As I told you, we are located in a very high seismic zone all along the Himalayas. We are prone to landslides because we have a large amount of area under mountainous and hilly regions. We are prone to floods because of the meandering courses of the rivers, and also droughts because we have certain rain shadow regions in the country. Now, climate change and environmental degradation have further compounded the frequency and the intensity of these disasters, along with increasing the vulnerability of the assets, that is the public property, and also people's life to these disasters. In addition, almost 1/3 of the country is already under the civil strife as well. So just now we have already seen what is happening in Manipur because of the demands of the scheduled tribe status by the Metis, which is not accepted by the Kukis and the Nagas. So floods. Coming to floods, if you look at the map of the country, after China, India is the second most hardest hit country by floods, with no less than 17 events. So as soon as we have the monsoons, we have certain areas that go under floods and some areas go dry because of the rain shadow location. And this scourge has a significant number of casualties, major economic damage to infrastructure, property, livelihoods, crops, etc. Earthquake. If you look at the earthquake, India with nearly 60% of the territory is being classified as moderate to severe seismic risk zone. If you look at cyclones, because of the large coastline, and we are located in the intertropical convergence zone, so India is located in the tropical belt. Indian subcontinent is one of the more regions that is worstly affected by the cyclones every year. So we have May from August to September, and again from November to December we have two cyclone seasons, and mostly affecting the west coast of India. The east coast of India. Its coastline, stretching about 7,600 kilometers, accounts for nearly 10% of the world's tropical cyclones, and majority of them, as I told, affects the eastern coast of India, that is the Bay of Bengal. Heat waves and drought waves are becoming more intense because of global warming, and also the nature of the change in landscape that is happening because of high urbanization, and also clearing of the land for agriculture and other development purposes as well. So extreme temperatures and resulting weather conditions are affecting the life of the residents and also the agriculture sector, because there is something called as optimum level of temperature that the plants can actually withstand. With global warming, these episodes of intense heat, more than 50 degrees centigrade is being experienced in India, and that too very frequently as well. So what are the steps exactly in disaster management or disaster risk reduction? So majorly disaster risk reduction or disaster management involves 4 important steps. First is your preparedness, response, mitigation and recovery. In your preparedness, we assess the threat, the resources that are needed for reducing the threat. Then you have organizational cooperation, drills, exercising, and also writing down a plan to manage these disasters. The second phase is response, where we have activation of an emergency protocol, medical assistance, first aid, shelter and evacuation, search and rescue operations, drones, secondary damage reduction. And the third phase is mitigation, improved reconstruction, legislative planning, regularly scheduled vulnerability risk assessments, and the fourth is recovery, that is damage assessment, cleanup, restoration of the critical systems and facilities, and basic reconstruction. All of this requires a lot of money, and therefore planning, disaster risk reduction planning is one of the features for sustainable growth as well. So how can we reduce disasters? Some of the technologies that we can really use in reducing the disasters and also risk reduction is satellites, drones, aerial surveys, sensors, and also sensors for earthquake detection as well. We also have tsunami warning centers located. Then there are some activities that the government of India certain frameworks that the Government of India has been implementing for disaster risk reduction of India, and one of the main is that we have a national platform for disaster risk reduction, which is a multi-stakeholder platform constituted by the Government of India to facilitate dialogue, sharing experiences of views, ideas, action-oriented research, and explore opportunities with regard to disaster risk reduction. The second one is we have a national disaster management plan. Now, this is the very first dedicated disaster management plan that was brought about by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2016, and it matches all the parameters of the Sendai Disaster Risk Reduction Framework 2015 to 2030. And for the first time, a horizontal and vertical integration of all the agencies from the local level up to the central level departments of the government were planned, and for reducing the risk of disasters and disaster management. The third is disaster risk reduction and management has been now turned into a Jan Andolan, with most of the participation coming from the people at the local levels. So we have Prime Minister giving up a 10-point agenda which emphasizes on building of local capacities, initiatives, especially the leadership of women in disaster risk management. And also India is a part of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or CDRI. Also, if you look at it internationally, we have two important frameworks, that is the Hyogo framework of action for disaster risk reduction, which was brought in 2005 to 2015. This is the very first internationally accepted framework for disaster risk reduction. And the second one, which is the successor of this framework, is the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction from 2015 to 2030. It is an international document that was adopted by the United Nations member states in 2015 at the World Conference of Disaster Risk Reduction held in Sendai, Japan. And finally, we have an international day known as the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction that is celebrated to raise awareness about disaster risk reduction on October 30. And we have a dedicated task force that is chaired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi itself, that is the National Disaster Management Authority, and a legislation in India to protect India from disaster vulnerabilities as well. So I hope this information was really helpful to you all to track out the developments of the working group for disaster risk reduction, because we are going to have a third meeting coming up in June 2023, that is in the coming months, and definitely this will help you to lay the foundation for your understanding for disaster risk reduction. Also, this topic is a dedicated topic in your APPSC Group 1 and Group 2 syllabus. Apart from that, TSPSC Group 1 and Group 2 in Science and Technology, Environment and Environment chapter. Apart from that, it is an important topic for the Civil Services and GS Paper 3 as well. So I hope this information was really helpful to you all, and if you did like, please do like, share, subscribe, and I shall see you in my next post. Until then, very happy learning.